In Millbrook's most prestigious law office, Aria Holloway sat stunned as her sister Liora claimed the entire family inheritance, citing blood rights, over an adopted child. 28-year-old Aria had spent her life believing she was the outsider in their grandmother's Victorian home, working tirelessly as a social worker, helping foster children while Liora lived in luxury. When family lawyer Elias Crestwood opened the sealed adoption papers, the devastating truth emerged. Liora was the adopted daughter, Aria the biological granddaughter. The inheritance theft built on manipulation and lies would tear their family apart, forcing both sisters to confront what truly defines belonging. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The salt wind carries grief across Millbrook's weathered coastline, mixing mourning with the eternal rhythm of waves against granite. Aria Holloway stands at the cemetery's edge, her black dress rippling in the October breeze as she watches the last mourners file past Eloise Ironwood's casket. The Victorian house looms behind them on the hill, its gabled windows reflecting gray morning light like watchful eyes. "She would have loved this turnout," Aria whispers, voice catching. "The entire town has come. Shopkeepers from Main Street, neighbors from decades past, children Eloise taught to read at the library. A lifetime of kindness made manifest in gentle murmurs of shared stories and remembered laughter." Liora moves beside her, elegant even in mourning, designer heels sinking into soft earth. "Grandmother always did know how to bring people together," she says. But there's something measured in her tone, calculating. Her eyes scan the crowd with inventory precision. Aria doesn't notice. Her attention remains fixed on the polished mahogany casket, on white roses Eloise had grown for 60 years. The woman who raised her, who bandaged scraped knees and celebrated every small victory, who never once made her feel like anything less than a beloved granddaughter despite the adoption papers. "I should say something," Aria murmurs, stepping forward. The mourners part respectfully, creating a path to the graveside. Pastor Williams nods encouragingly, weathered face kind beneath silver hair. "Friends," Aria begins, social workers training helping her find strength despite trembling hands. "Eloise Ironwood was more than a grandmother to me. She was—" The words threaten to break, but she pushes forward. "She was unconditional love personified. When my father, Kajal, died serving our country, she could have let grief consume her. Instead, she opened her heart wider. She took in 2 broken little girls and made us whole." Agreement ripples through the crowd. Aria catches sight of Dr. Whitman dabbing at her eyes, Tom Henderson from the hardware store nodding solemnly. These people knew Eloise's heart, witnessed her generosity firsthand. "She taught me that family isn't just about blood," Aria continues, unaware of how those words will echo in the coming days. "It's about choosing to love, day after day, through everything life throws at you. She chose us, and in return, we were blessed with the strongest foundation 2 girls could ask for." Behind her, Liora's expression remains composed, but manicured fingers toy with her wedding ring, a tell Aria has never learned to read. Robert Morrison stands slightly apart, 6-year-old Emma clinging to his leg while 4-year-old Michael fidgets impatiently. Liora's family. Perfect on the surface, but Robert's eyes hold a distance that wasn't there when they first married. "Eloise always said the house would outlast us all," Aria concludes, gesturing toward the Victorian's towering silhouette. "But what will truly outlast us is the love she poured into every corner of it, into every corner of our lives." As Aria steps back, Elias Crestwood approaches. The family lawyer moves with careful precision, gray suit immaculate despite the morning's emotional weight. He's handled the Ironwood family's affairs for 2 decades, witnessed their joys and sorrows with professional discretion. But today, something about his demeanor seems different, heavier. "Aria, Liora, beautiful service. Your grandmother would be proud." He pauses, glancing around at the dispersing crowd before lowering his voice. I know this isn't the time, but we'll need to schedule the formal reading of the will. Given the complexity of the estate, I'd prefer to handle it in my office. Would Thursday morning work? Liora steps forward smoothly. Of course, Mr. Crestwood, whatever needs to be done. Her response comes too quickly, too prepared, but grief can make anyone eager to handle practical matters. Thursday's fine, Aria agrees, though discussing money and possessions feels like betraying the morning's solemnity. I assume it's straightforward, the house, her savings. Something flickers across Elias's face, so brief Aria almost misses it. We'll discuss everything Thursday, 10 o'clock.
He hands them each his card. Though they've known him since childhood, the formality feels strange, heavy with unspoken implications. As the lawyer walks away, Leora's arm slips through Aria's with sisterly comfort. Come on, we should head back to the house. People will want to pay their respects there, share stories. They walk up the winding path together, past the rose garden Eloise tended until her final summer, past the ancient oak where they'd carved their initials as children. The Victorian house welcomes them with its familiar embrace. Creaking floorboards, lingering lavender sachets, rooms full of 4 generations of memories. But as Aria moves through familiar spaces, accepting condolences and sharing remembered laughter, she begins noticing small things. Photo albums moved from usual places. Eloise's jewelry box, always kept on the vanity, now absent. The antique writing desk in the study, locked when it had never been locked before. "Liora," she asks as they prepare tea for the gathering crowd, "did you move some of grandmother's things for safekeeping?" "Just securing valuables," Liora replies without looking up from arranging cookies on Eloise's best china. "You know how people can be at these things. Better safe than sorry." The explanation makes sense, but something about Leora's tone, too casual, too dismissive, plants unease in Aria's chest. She watches her sister move through the kitchen with proprietorial confidence, noting which cabinets she opens without hesitation, which drawers she seems to know by heart. As afternoon wears on and mourners gradually depart, the sisters find themselves alone in the house that has sheltered 4 generations. The silence feels different now. Not peaceful, but expectant, waiting. "I'll stay tonight," Aria says, clearing away teacups. "I can't bear the thought of the house being empty. Not yet." Liora pauses in folding napkins. "Are you sure that's wise, being here alone with all the memories?" "I need this. One more night to say goodbye properly." "Of course." Leora's smile is understanding, supportive, but her eyes hold something else, something that might be disappointment, frustration, or relief. "I'll check on you in the morning. We have so much to take care of." As Liora gathers her purse and calls for Robert and the children, Aria feels solitude's weight settling over the Victorian house. Tomorrow will bring practical concerns, legal matters, the business of death that follows every life's end. Standing at the kitchen window as Leora's car disappears down the coastal road, Aria doesn't yet know that her sister has already begun taking everything away from her. She doesn't know about meetings with Elias, about pressure applied to an aging woman's confused mind, about careful manipulation that rewrote a lifetime of love into legal language favoring blood over bonds. She only knows something feels different in the house tonight, something that has nothing to do with Eloise's absence and everything to do with the subtle shift in how Liora moved through these familiar spaces, like someone who already owned them. The grandfather clock chimes 8 o'clock, echoing through rooms that tomorrow will no longer feel like home. In her grief, Aria mistakes the chill running down her spine for October wind rattling old windows. She has no way of knowing that the real cold is yet to come. Thursday morning arrives with the kind of cruel brightness that makes grief feel like a personal insult from the universe. Aria sits in her rental car outside Elias Crestwood's law office on Millbrook's Main Street, watching seagulls wheel overhead with the same carefree indifference they'd shown the day Eloise died. 7 days have passed since the funeral. 7 nights of sleeping in the Victorian house that still smells like her grandmother's lavender soap and still echoes with decades of shared laughter. The brass nameplate beside the office door reads Crestwood and Associates in elegant script, though Elias has practiced alone since his partner retired 5 years ago. Aria has been here before, signing papers when she turned 18, updating her will after starting her social work career, small legal matters that felt routine and safe. Today feels different. Today feels like an ending. Liora arrives precisely at 10 o'clock, stepping out of her silver Mercedes with the kind of composed efficiency that has always made Aria feel slightly inadequate. Her sister wears a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than Aria makes in a month, but there's something brittle in her perfection today, a tightness around her eyes that suggests she slept as poorly as Aria did. "Ready for this?" Liora asks, though she doesn't wait for an answer before pushing through the office door. Elias's receptionist, Margaret, has known both sisters since they were children racing through downtown Millbrook during summer festivals. Today, she offers them sympathetic smiles and coffee that taste like comfort and normalcy. But when Elias emerges from his office, something in his expression makes Aria's stomach clench with foreboding. "Ladies, please come in," he says, his usual warmth tempered by professional gravity. The office hasn't changed since Aria's childhood. Leather-bound legal volumes lining mahogany shelves, a Persian rug that has absorbed decades of difficult conversations, windows overlooking the harbor where fishing boats bob like hopeful prayers. Elias settles behind his desk with careful deliberation, a manila folder positioned precisely before him. Aria notices his hands trembling slightly as he opens it, notices how his eyes avoid direct contact with either sister. In 25 years of legal practice, he has delivered news of inheritances and losses, victories and defeats. But today, he looks like a man carrying a burden too heavy for his conscience. "Your grandmother's will is straightforward in its terms," he begins, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone reading from a script. "The Victorian house at 247 Coastal Drive, along with all furnishings, artwork, and personal effects, is bequeathed to Liora Whitthorne. The investment portfolio, savings accounts, and remaining financial assets totaling approximately $800,000 also pass to Liora." And Aria's hands shake as she turns the key in the Victorian house's front door, her anger from Main Street crystallizing into something colder, more determined. The familiar click of the lock sounds different now, less like coming home and more like trespassing. Liora wants her gone by weekend.
4 days to dismantle 28 years of belonging. The house welcomes her with its usual embrace of creaking floorboards and lavender-scented air, but everything feels tainted now by the knowledge that none of it truly belongs to her. Never belonged to her, according to the cruel mathematics of blood versus love. Aria drops her purse beside the antique hall table and stares up at the family portraits lining the staircase wall. 4 generations of Ironwoods gazing down with painted eyes that suddenly seem to judge rather than welcome. She begins in Eloise's bedroom, the most painful place, but also the most logical. If there are answers to be found, they'll be here, among her grandmother's most private possessions. The room still smells like Eloise's rosewater and the menthol cream she used for arthritis. Aria opens the mahogany wardrobe with reverent care, running her fingers over dresses that still hold the shape of the woman who wore them. Behind the winter coats, she discovers a leather document folder she's never seen before. Inside, medical records from Dr. Whitman's office dating back 6 months. Aria sinks onto the window seat, autumn lights streaming across pages that paint a troubling picture of Eloise's final months. Increased anxiety, memory problems, notes about family stress, and patient reports feeling pressured about financial decisions.
One entry from mid-July stops Aria cold. Patient exhibits signs of distress when discussing estate planning, reports granddaughter visiting frequently and talking about bloodlines and family duty. Recommended reducing stressful conversations, but patient feels obligated to do right by biology. Biology. Blood. The same words Liora used so casually in the lawyer's office, as if genetics were currency and love merely sentiment. Aria photographs the medical records with shaking hands, then turns to the wooden jewelry box on Eloise's vanity, one of the few things she's apparently entitled to inherit. But as she opens the familiar compartments, she discovers something unexpected: a small brass key hidden beneath the velvet lining. A key that fits the antique writing desk downstairs, the desk that had been mysteriously locked since the funeral. The desk reveals its secrets reluctantly. Hidden in the bottom drawer, Aria finds a manila envelope labeled Aria, personal, in Eloise's careful handwriting. Inside, photographs that don't match her understanding of family history. A picture of Eloise holding a baby, clearly Aria, based on the resemblance. But the woman beside them isn't anyone Aria recognizes. Young, beautiful, with Aria's dark hair and determined chin. There are letters, too, written in a flowing script Aria doesn't recognize. Dear Eloise, I hope you understand this is the hardest decision I've ever made. But Kale is gone, and I can't give her what she needs. You can. Please tell her someday that I loved her enough to let her go. The letter is signed D and dated 28 years ago. D. Not a social worker or adoption agency coordinator, but someone who knew Eloise personally. Someone who knew Kale. Aria's hands tremble as she studies the photographs again, noting details she'd missed. The intimate way the woman's hand rests on Eloise's shoulder, the comfortable familiarity in their shared smile. This wasn't a formal adoption. This was family. The sound of the front gate creaking interrupts her discovery. Through the window, she sees Mrs. Henley from next door approaching with a covered casserole dish, the kind of gesture that has sustained grieving families in small towns for generations. "Oh, sweetheart," Mrs. Henley says when Aria opens the door, her weathered face creased with genuine sympathy. "I brought you some of that tuna noodle casserole your grandmother always loved. Thought you might need some comfort food while you're sorting things out." They sit in the kitchen where Aria has eaten thousands of meals, where homework was completed and teenage heartbreaks were discussed over cups of cocoa. Mrs. Henley's presence is comforting, familiar, and before she knows it, Aria finds herself asking questions. "Mrs. Henley, do you remember much about when Liora and I first came to live with grandmother?" The older woman's expression shifts subtly. "Well, dear, you were just babies, really. Such a tragedy about your father. But your grandmother, she was so determined to keep the family together. Were there many visitors back then? People helping with the adoption paperwork?" Mrs. Henley pauses, her coffee cup suspended halfway to her lips. "I remember your grandmother being very private about the arrangements. Very
Protective. There was that young woman who came by a few times. Beautiful girl. Looked quite a bit like you, actually. But then she stopped coming, and Eloise said it was better that way. Cleaner." "What young woman?" "Oh, I don't remember her name. But she seemed so sad, watching you play in the garden. Like it was breaking her heart." Mrs. Henley sets down her cup with a gentle clink. "Why do you ask, dear?" Before Aria can answer, her phone buzzes with a text from Liora. "Contractor wants to start demo Monday. Please have your things out by Sunday evening." Demo. Demolition. The word feels violent, destructive. Mrs. Henley notices Aria's expression change and follows her gaze to the phone. "That sister of yours certainly is eager to make changes," she says carefully. "She's been by quite a lot these past few months. Always seemed to leave your grandmother more upset than when she arrived." The comment confirms what Aria suspected from the medical records.
Upset how? Anxious, confused. After Leora's visits, your grandmother would spend hours in her garden, muttering about doing right and family obligations. It worried me, to be honest. She'd been doing so well, and then suddenly, Mrs. Henley trails off, seeming to realize she might be speaking out of turn. Mrs. Henley, do you think my grandmother was herself at the end, making clear decisions? The older woman's silence speaks volumes. Finally, she reaches across the table and covers Aria's hand with her own. Your grandmother loved you more than life itself, sweetheart. Whatever's happening with this inheritance business, it doesn't change that truth. After Mrs. Henley leaves, Aria sits alone in the kitchen, surrounded by fragments of a puzzle she's only beginning to understand. The medical records, the mysterious photographs, the concerned observations of neighbors who watched Eloise's final months with growing worry. The pattern suggests something far more sinister than a simple change of heart about family bloodlines. Aria picks up her phone and scrolls through her contacts until she finds Dr. Patricia Whitman's office number. If she's going to challenge Leora's inheritance, she needs more than suspicions and neighbors' gossip. She needs evidence. And she needs to understand the truth about her own origins, a truth that seems far more complicated than she ever imagined. As afternoon shadows lengthen across the kitchen floor, Aria realizes she's no longer just fighting for an inheritance. She's fighting for the truth about who she really is, and whether the love that raised her was built on lies designed to protect or to deceive. The Victorian house creaks around her like a living thing, keeping secrets. And for the first time since Eloise's death, Aria feels like she might not be alone in this battle. The words hit Aria like a physical blow. She feels the air leave her lungs, feels the room tilt slightly as reality rearranges itself around this impossible truth. I don't understand. That can't be right. Elias continues with mechanical precision, though his knuckles are white where they grip the document. To Aria Holloway, your grandmother leaves her personal jewelry collection, photo albums, and $10,000 for transition expenses. The phrase sounds clinical, dismissive, pocket change compared to the fortune Liora has just inherited. When Aria's voice cracks, she clears her throat, tries again. When was this will written?
The original will was executed 12 years ago, Elias says carefully. However, this version was amended and re-executed on July 15th of this year, 3 months before your grandmother's death. 3 months. Aria remembers July. Eloise had seemed increasingly forgetful, more anxious than usual. There were days when she forgot Aria's name, calling her by their childhood neighbor's name instead. Days when she spoke to Cale as if he were still alive, still coming home from deployment. "I'm sorry, Aria," Liora says, but her voice lacks genuine surprise. "I had no idea grandmother had changed things, but you have to understand, blood family has always mattered to her. I mean, it's not personal, but legally speaking, I am her biological granddaughter." The phrase hits Aria like a slap. Blood family. As if 28 years of love, of scraped knees kissed better, and bedtime stories and quiet conversations about boys and dreams and fears could be erased by genetics. As if adoption papers somehow diluted the depth of connection between her and the woman who chose to raise her. "She loved me," Aria says, hating how desperate she sounds. "She told me I was her heart. She said it didn't matter that I wasn't—" The words stick in her throat, too painful to voice. "Of course she loved you," Liora replies with practiced sympathy. "But love and legal inheritance are different things. I have children to think about, Aria. Emma and Michael deserve their family legacy." Elias shifts uncomfortably in his chair, and Aria catches something in his expression. Guilt, perhaps, or regret. "There are procedural questions about the amendment," he says carefully. "Given your grandmother's condition in her final months, If you wished to contest. Contest? Leora's voice sharpens. On what grounds? The will is legally sound. Grandmother was of sound mind when she signed it. But Aria remembers those final months differently. Remembers Eloise's increasing confusion, her anxiety when Liora visited, the way she would whisper about family obligations and doing right by blood. She remembers finding her grandmother crying one afternoon, though Eloise couldn't explain why. I'll need 30 days to vacate the house, Aria says quietly, the words tasting like surrender. Actually, Liora says, consulting her phone with business-like efficiency, I've spoken with a contractor about renovations. He can start Monday if the house is empty. Would this weekend work better? The casual cruelty of it steals Aria's breath. Renovations? As if 28 years of memories are nothing more than outdated decor to be stripped away and replaced, as if the wallpaper in her childhood bedroom and the pencil marks measuring her growth on the kitchen door frame are impediments to Liora's vision of improvement. I'll need time to pack grandmother's things. The jewelry, the photo albums. Of course. Just quickly, please. I know this is hard, but we all have to move forward. Elias hands Aria a copy of the will with hands that still tremble slightly. I'm truly sorry, he says, and something in his tone suggests he's apologizing for more than just being the bearer of bad news. If you need time to process this, to consider your options, but Liora is already standing, already gathering her purse with the satisfied efficiency of someone whose business has been concluded successfully. Thank you, Mr. Crestwood. I'll be in touch about transferring the accounts. As they walk out of the office together, Aria feels like she's moving through water, everything distant and distorted.
The autumn sunshine feels harsh against her face, the familiar street foreign and unwelcoming. Liora pauses beside her Mercedes, expression softening into something that might pass for sisterly concern. I know this is difficult, she says, but maybe it's for the best. You've spent so much time taking care of everyone else, grandmother, your foster kids at work. Maybe now you can focus on yourself, find your own path. The words are meant to sound encouraging, but they feel like dismissal, like absolution for stealing everything Aria has ever called home. As Liora drives away, Aria stands alone on Main Street, watching the woman who was once her closest confidant disappear around the corner with the casual efficiency of someone who has just completed a successful hostile takeover. The seagulls overhead cry their harsh songs of survival, and for the first time since Eloise's death, Aria allows herself to feel the full weight of her fury. Saturday morning finds Aria driving through Millbrook's affluent harbor district, where Liora's colonial-style home sits like a monument to respectability among manicured lawns and expensive cars. The contrast with the Victorian house's weathered charm couldn't be starker. Where Eloise's home embraced visitors with its rambling porches and lived-in comfort, Liora's house presents itself with geometric precision and intimidating perfection. Aria parks behind Robert's BMW, noting the children's bikes scattered on the front lawn, the only sign of genuine life in an otherwise museum-perfect setting. Aria clutches the manila envelope containing the mysterious photographs and medical records, evidence of a truth that grows more disturbing with each revelation. Dr. Whitman had been reluctant to discuss her concerns over the phone, but her carefully worded responses confirmed Aria's suspicions. Eloise's final months had been marked with unusual anxiety and pressure she couldn't or wouldn't identify. The doorbell echoes through the house with Westminster chimes, and Robert answers wearing weekend casual clothes that probably cost more than Aria's monthly rent. His smile is genuine, but tired, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he's been sleeping as poorly as everyone else involved in this unraveling family drama. Aria, come in. Leora's in the living room with the kids. He pauses, studying her expression. Everything all right? You look determined. I need to talk to Liora about grandmother's will, about what really happened. something flickers across Robert's face. Concern, perhaps, or resignation. "I'll get the kids set up with a movie upstairs," he says quietly. "Give you two some privacy." The living room showcases Leora's expensive taste. Cream-colored leather sofas that look untouched by daily life. Abstract art chosen more for color coordination than emotional resonance. Fresh flowers arranged with professional precision. Leora sits cross-legged on the sofa, laptop balanced on her knees, golden hair pulled back in a messy bun that somehow manages to look effortlessly elegant. "Aria!" she exclaims, looking up with surprise that seems genuine. "I wasn't expecting you. How's the packing going? I know it must be difficult." "We need to talk." Aria settles into the chair across from her sister, placing the envelope on the coffee table between them like evidence in a trial. "About grandmother's will, about what you did to her." Leora's expression shifts subtly, warmth cooling into wariness. "What I did? Aria, I know you're upset about the inheritance, but—" "I found her medical records." Aria's voice cuts through the placating tone with surgical precision. Dr. Whitman documented her anxiety, her confusion about family obligations, and feeling pressured about financial decisions. The timeline matches perfectly with your increased visits. For a moment, Leora's mask slips, revealing something harder beneath the concerned sister facade. Then she recovers, closing the laptop with deliberate calm. "Grandmother was getting old, Aria. Old people get anxious. It doesn't mean anything. It means you manipulated a confused, vulnerable woman into rewriting her will." Aria opens the envelope, spreading the photographs across the coffee table like evidence in a trial. "And I found these. Pictures of me as a baby with a woman who isn't from any adoption agency. Letters talking about letting me go because Cale was dead." Leora's eyes widen as she studies the photographs, and for the first time, Aria sees genuine shock in her sister's expression. But it's not the shock of discovery. It's the shock of someone whose carefully constructed narrative is beginning to crumble. "Where did you find these?" Liora asks, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hidden in grandmother's desk, the desk you made sure to lock after the funeral." Aria leans forward, watching her sister's face carefully. "You knew, didn't you? You knew there was more to my adoption story."
I knew grandmother kept secrets. Leora's voice hardens. I knew she loved you more. I knew that no matter how hard I tried, how perfect I was, how much I achieved, you were always her favorite, her precious, rescued granddaughter. The words hang in the air between them, years of buried resentment finally breaking the surface. Robert's footsteps can be heard upstairs, the muted sounds of children's laughter providing an unsettling counterpoint to the tension building in the pristine living room. "That's not true," Aria says. But even as she speaks, she remembers small moments. The way Eloise's face lit up when Aria called, the extra attention during homework struggles, the special traditions that seemed to belong just to them. "Isn't it?" Liora stands abruptly, pacing to the window overlooking her perfect garden. "Do you know what it's like to spend your entire life competing with a ghost? To watch your grandmother light up for the adopted daughter while treating the biological one like an afterthought?" "Liora, that's not—" "It is." The mask drops completely now, revealing the raw wound beneath. "I'm her actual blood, Aria. I'm the one who should have mattered, but somehow you were always more important, more loved, more cherished." Her voice breaks slightly. "Do you have any idea how that feels?" Aria stares at her sister, really sees her for perhaps the first time in years. The desperate need for approval, the obsession with perfection, the way she collected achievements like armor against some invisible threat. "Liora, she loved us both." "No." Leora's voice regains its edge. "She loved you. I was just there. The consolation prize when the real granddaughter needed her attention." She turns from the window, her expression cold. "But blood matters, Aria. In the end, biology wins. The will proves that."
The will proves you manipulated a sick woman. The will proves that grandmother finally came to her senses about family hierarchy. Leora's smile is sharp, triumphant. And if you think you can challenge it based on some old photographs and medical speculation, you're welcome to try. But consider this. I know people in your professional circle, social workers who push too hard, who make unfounded accusations, don't tend to keep their licenses very long. The threat hangs in the air like poison. Aria feels her social work career, her identity, her purpose, suddenly vulnerable to her sister's connections and influence. You would destroy my career to keep stolen money? I would protect my children's inheritance from someone who clearly can't accept reality. Leora's voice carries the smooth confidence of someone who has already won. You're not blood family, Aria. You never were. It's time you accepted that and moved on. Robert appears in the doorway, his face pale. Liora, maybe we should... Liora, please take the children to the park, Liora says without looking at him. Aria was just leaving. But Aria doesn't move. She studies her sister's face, seeing clearly for the first time in years the desperate need for approval, the obsession with perfection, the way she collected achievements like armor against some invisible threat. I'm not giving up, Aria says quietly, gathering the photographs with steady hands. Whatever you did to grandmother, whatever lies you told her, the truth has a way of coming out. As she walks toward the door, Leora's voice follows her. The truth is that blood matters more than feelings, Aria, and you're about to learn that lesson the hard way. Standing in the driveway beside her car, Aria realizes she's no longer looking at the sister she grew up loving. She's looking at a stranger who would sacrifice everything, family, morality, love itself, to fill a void that can never be filled by money or houses or legal documents. The real question now isn't whether she can prove Leora's manipulation, it's whether she's strong enough to fight someone who has nothing left to lose, but everything left to protect. Monday morning arrives gray and unforgiving, matching Aria's mood, as she sits in the Millbrook Police Department's cramped interview room. Detective Linda Russo slides a cup of coffee across the scarred table, her weathered hands steady, despite the gravity of what they're discussing.
At 45, Linda has seen enough family disputes turn criminal to recognize the patterns, and everything about Eloise Ironwood's final months fits the profile of sophisticated elder abuse. I've reviewed the medical records you provided, Linda says, her voice carrying the measured professionalism of someone who has learned to deliver bad news with compassion. Dr. Whitman's notes paint a troubling picture. Your grandmother's anxiety levels spiked dramatically starting in May, coinciding with your sister's increased visits. Aria wraps her hands around the coffee cup, seeking warmth she can't seem to find anywhere else. 3 days have passed since her confrontation with Liora, 3 days of sleepless nights in the Victorian house that no longer feels like sanctuary. The contractor's truck has been parked outside since dawn, waiting for Aria's belongings to clear the way for demolition. The timeline is what convinced me to take this seriously, Linda continues, spreading documents across the table with practiced efficiency. Most people assume elder abuse involves physical violence or obvious theft, but financial manipulation, especially when it involves family members with legitimate access, is much more subtle and therefore harder to prosecute. Dr. Patricia Whitman arrives at 9:30 sharp, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun that speaks to decades of medical professionalism. She settles into the plastic chair with obvious reluctance, her hands folding and unfolding in her lap as she struggles with the ethical implications of what she's about to reveal. I should have spoken up sooner, she begins, guilt weighing down her words, but doctor-patient confidentiality, and Eloise was so insistent that she was handling family business properly. Linda opens a new notebook, pen poised. Tell us about the changes you observed in Mrs. Ironwood's final months. The anxiety started in late spring. Eloise had always been one of my most stable patients, blood pressure under control, mild arthritis, but mentally sharp as ever.
Then suddenly, she was calling my office multiple times a week, complaining of insomnia, asking for anxiety medication she'd never needed before. Dr. Whitman pauses, gathering her thoughts. When I asked about stressors, she mentioned feeling pressure about family obligations. She used that phrase repeatedly, family obligations. She said Liora was helping her understand her responsibilities to blood family and that she needed to correct past mistakes. Aria's stomach clenches. The phrase sounds so much like Liora's justification at the lawyer's office. Clinical, manipulative, designed to sound reasonable while undermining everything Eloise had believed about love transcending genetics. Did she ever mention feeling pressured about specific decisions? Linda asks. In July, she asked me about mental competency evaluations. She was terrified that if she didn't do the right thing, someone might question her ability to make decisions. She kept saying she had to fix things before it was too late. The room falls silent as the implications sink in. Eloise, confused and vulnerable, had been convinced that her love for her adopted granddaughter was somehow wrong, a mistake that needed legal correction before anyone could question her judgment. Linda makes careful notes, then looks up. Dr. Whitman, in your professional opinion, was Mrs. Ironwood capable of making complex financial decisions during this period? She was experiencing significant anxiety-related cognitive impairment. Decision-making capacity fluctuates under those conditions. Some days she seemed fine, but other days, Dr. Whitman shakes her head, I documented my concerns about outside pressure, but I couldn't identify the source clearly enough to intervene. After Dr. Whitman leaves, Linda calls in Tom Brennan from the Harbor District. The elderly fisherman sits uncomfortably in civilian clothes, his weathered hands clasping a coffee cup as he recounts what he witnessed during his evening walks past the Victorian house. Mrs. Ironwood used to wave from her garden every evening, friendly as could be, always had time for a chat about the weather or the tourists. But starting around summer, she seemed different, nervous. And that daughter of hers, Liora, she'd be there arguing with her about something, loud enough that I could hear voices from the street. What kind of arguments? Linda asks. Couldn't make out words, but the tone. It was the kind of voice you use when you're trying to convince someone to do something they don't want to do.
Persistent, wearing them down. Tom's expression darkens. And Mrs. Ironwood would be crying afterward. I saw her through the kitchen window more than once, just sitting there, crying. The interviews continue through the afternoon. Margaret from the grocery store remembers Liora intercepting Eloise's calls, explaining that her grandmother was too tired for visitors. The postal worker recalls being instructed to deliver all mail directly to Liora, instead of leaving it at the house. Piece by piece, Linda assembles a pattern of isolation designed to give Liora exclusive access to her increasingly vulnerable grandmother. It's textbook emotional manipulation, Linda explains, as they review the evidence. Isolate the victim from outside perspectives, create artificial urgency around decisions, and exploit existing guilt or confusion. Your sister is intelligent. She knew exactly which psychological buttons to push. Aria stares at the growing file of evidence, each document representing another violation of the woman who had raised her with such love. What happens now? We have enough evidence to recommend the district attorney consider elder abuse charges. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult is a felony in Maine, especially when it involves this amount of money. Linda's expression grows serious. But I need to be clear about what that means. If we pursue criminal charges, this becomes public. There will be a trial. Your sister could face prison time. The weight of the decision settles on Aria's shoulders like a physical burden. Somewhere across town, Liora is probably helping Emma with homework or reading bedtime stories to Michael, playing the role of devoted mother while the evidence of her crimes accumulates in a police file. She threatened my career, Aria says quietly, said she'd destroy my social work license if I fought the will. Linda's expression hardens. That's witness intimidation, another felony. She leans forward, her voice gentle but firm. Aria, I know this is your sister. I know you still love her, despite everything she's done. But elder abuse thrives in the shadows, protected by family loyalty and shame.
Your grandmother deserves justice. Through the interview room's small window, Aria can see the harbor where fishing boats return with the day's catch, their hulls heavy with the sea's bounty. She thinks about Eloise watching those same boats from her garden, never knowing that the granddaughter she'd raised with such devotion was systematically destroying the peace of her final months. What about the inheritance? Can we challenge the will? With this evidence of coercion and mental impairment, absolutely. But criminal charges will strengthen the civil case significantly. Linda closes the file with finality. The question is whether you're prepared to see this through to the end. Aria pictures Liora's perfect house, her perfect family, her perfect facade built on the foundation of stolen love and manipulated grief. Then she pictures Eloise crying alone in her kitchen, convinced that loving an adopted granddaughter was somehow a betrayal of blood family. The choice when it comes feels less like a decision and more like an inevitability.
Voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. The words hit Aria like physical blows. She stares at the birth certificate, at her father's name written in official script, at her mother's signature giving her up to ensure the child's welfare and family stability. The room tilts sideways as 28 years of identity reshapes itself around this impossible truth. "That can't be right," Liora whispers, but her voice lacks conviction. "Aria was adopted. I'm the biological granddaughter. I'm the one with blood rights." Elias opens the second envelope with hands that have moved beyond trembling into steady resignation. Liora Whitthorne, birth name Liora Marie Sullivan, was legally adopted by the Ironwood family on March 15th, 3 months after your third birthday. Your parents, James and Maria Sullivan, died in a car accident and Eloise petitioned the court for custody. The silence that follows is deafening. Liora stares at the documents as if they're written in a foreign language, her face cycling through disbelief, horror, and devastating comprehension. The blood rights she claimed so righteously, the biological superiority she used to justify stealing Eloise's love, all of it built on a lie she never knew she was telling. "No," Liora breathes, the word escaping like air from a punctured balloon. "No, that's impossible. I remember belonging here. I remember grandmother choosing me because I was family." "You were 3 years old," Elias says gently, "too young to understand the legal distinctions. Eloise raised you as her granddaughter because that's what you became, through love, through choice, through the bonds that matter more than biology. But legally, genetically, you were adopted. Aria was not." Detective Russo makes careful notes documenting how the inheritance theft becomes even more grotesque in light of this revelation. Liora had manipulated her grandmother into believing that love should yield to bloodline, never knowing she was arguing against her own legal standing in the family. "Why?" Aria's voice cracks as she struggles to process the magnitude of Eloise's deception. "Why hide this from me? From both of us?" Elias pulls out a handwritten letter, yellowed with age, bearing Eloise's careful script. She left instructions to be read only if these records were ever unsealed. He clears his throat and begins. "My beloved granddaughters, if you are hearing this, then the secrets I kept to protect you have finally been revealed. Aria, my darling, you were born from love. A brief, passionate love between my son and a young woman who couldn't provide for you after his death. Dorian Ravenscroft was barely 20, unmarried, with no family support. She loved you enough to give you to me, to give you the stability and security she couldn't offer. Liora, my precious child, you came to us broken by tragedy, needing the same love and security that Aria needed. There was never a difference in my heart between you. Both of you were gifts, both of you were chosen, both of you were completely and utterly mine. I hid the truth because I feared it would create divisions where none should exist. I feared that Aria would feel obligated to find her birth mother, that Liora would feel less secure in her place with us. I wanted you to grow up as sisters, as equals, without the complications of biology creating hierarchies of belonging. If these words are being read, then my fears have proved justified, and the very distinctions I tried to erase have caused pain I hoped to prevent. Please know that every choice I made was born from love. Imperfect, protective, perhaps misguided love, but love nonetheless. The letter continues, detailing Eloise's arrangements with Dorian, her legal maneuverings to ensure both girls' security, her growing guilt over the deception. As Elias reads, both sisters sit in stunned silence, their entire understanding of family, identity, and belonging crumbling around them. When he finishes, Liora stands abruptly, her composure finally shattering. "This is impossible," she says, her voice rising toward hysteria. "I built my entire life on being the biological heir. I convinced grandmother that blood mattered more than adoption. The realization of what she has done, what she has stolen from her actual biological sister, seems to hit her all at once. "You manipulated a vulnerable woman into betraying her own granddaughter," Detective Russo says quietly. "The irony is that you are arguing against your own legal position in the family." Liora sinks back into her chair, the weight of 28 years of mistaken identity crushing her carefully constructed worldview. Across from her, Aria stares at documents that prove she belonged here all along, not through Eloise's charity or generous adoption policies, but through the oldest claim of all, blood, the biological granddaughter she had always been, raised by the woman who was truly her grandmother, loved not despite her origins, but because of them. And the sister that she had trusted, fought with, and ultimately been betrayed by, the sister who had stolen her inheritance while claiming superior biological rights, had been the adopted child all along. The truth, when it finally emerges after decades of darkness, proves that the cruelest lies are often the ones we tell ourselves. The afternoon sun slants through Elias Crestwood's office windows, illuminating dust motes that dance like fragments of shattered certainty. Liora hasn't moved from her chair in 20 minutes, staring at the adoption papers as if willing them to rearrange themselves into a more palatable truth. Her breathing comes in shallow gasps, each inhalation seeming to bring fresh waves of comprehension about the magnitude of her mistake. I need to call Robert," she finally whispers, fumbling for her phone with hands that shake like autumn leaves. "The children."
Oh, God! The children! What do I tell them? Detective Russo exchanges glances with Elias, both recognizing the signs of complete psychological collapse. "Mrs. Whitthorne, perhaps you should have someone drive you home. You're in no condition to—" "Don't." Leora's voice cuts through the suggestion with desperate sharpness. "Don't tell me what condition I'm in. I've been living a lie for 28 years. I've built my entire identity on being the biological granddaughter, the rightful heir, the one who belonged by blood. And it was all—" She laughs, a sound devoid of humor. "It was all backwards." Aria watches her sister's breakdown with a mixture of vindication and unexpected compassion. The woman who had stolen her inheritance, who had manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman and threatened Aria's career, is crumbling before her eyes. But beneath the satisfaction of being proven right lies something more complex, the recognition that they've both been victims of Eloise's well-intentioned deception. "Liora," Aria says softly, "this doesn't change the fact that grandmother loved you, that you belonged in our family. Doesn't it?" Leora's eyes are bright with unshed tears. "I spent months convincing her that biology mattered more than love. I made her believe that choosing you over me was somehow wrong, somehow unfair to her real granddaughter. I made an 82-year-old woman doubt the love she'd given freely for decades." Her voice breaks completely. "And I was the adopted one all along." The irony is too cruel for words. Liora had weaponized the very distinction that should have protected Aria, never knowing she was arguing against her own legal position in the family. Every conversation about blood rights, every manipulation about biological inheritance, every cruel reminder about adoption versus real family, all of it had been a knife she'd turned against herself. Detective Russo gathers the documents with professional efficiency. "Mrs. Whitthorne, given these revelations, we need to discuss how this affects the criminal investigation. The elder abuse charges stand regardless of biological relationships, but the inheritance fraud becomes significantly more serious now that we know Miss Holloway is the legitimate heir. What happens to the money? Aria asks, though the question feels surreal. Hours ago, she was the disinherited adopted daughter. Now she's the biological granddaughter whose birthright was stolen through manipulation and lies. The will is invalid, Elias explains, his voice heavy with decades of suppressed truth. It was executed based on fraudulent premises, specifically the belief that Liora had superior biological claims to the estate. With these documents unsealed, the previous will from 12 years ago becomes the active document. That will left everything to you, Aria, as the biological heir. The Victorian house, the savings account, the investments, everything Liora had stolen through months of psychological manipulation now legally belongs to Aria by virtue of the very bloodline Liora had used to justify the theft. I can't process this, Liora says, standing abruptly. I need to go home. I need to figure out how to tell my family that their mother is a fraud. You're not a fraud, Aria says, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. You're the victim of a complicated situation that none of us understood. But Liora is already gathering her purse, her movements jerky with barely controlled panic. I convinced my dying grandmother to doubt 28 years of love, Aria. I made her believe that choosing you over me was somehow wrong, somehow unfair to her real granddaughter. I made an 82-year-old woman doubt the love she'd given freely for decades. Her voice breaks completely. And I was the adopted one all along. The door closes behind her with the soft click of finality, leaving Aria alone with Detective Russo and Elias in a room that suddenly feels too quiet. Through the windows, she can see Liora walking to her Mercedes with the unsteady gait of someone whose entire world has tilted off its axis. This is a lot to process, Detective Russo says with characteristic understatement. Are you all right? Am I?
Aria examines her feelings like a scientist studying unfamiliar specimens. Relief, certainly. The legal vindication of her inheritance claim. Satisfaction at seeing Liora face consequences for her manipulation, but also an unexpected sadness for the sister who had lived her entire life believing she was something she wasn't. I need to see the house, Aria says finally. I need to walk through it again, knowing what I know now. An hour later, she stands in the Victorian's front hallway, seeing the family portraits with new eyes. Every photograph tells a different story now. Eloise holding baby Aria not as a generous woman caring for an adopted child, but as a grandmother cradling her blood granddaughter. 3-year-old Liora, gap-toothed and grinning, truly adopted, but loved with the same fierce devotion Eloise had shown Aria. The medical records scattered on the kitchen table paint an even more disturbing picture when viewed through the lens of truth. Eloise's anxiety hadn't just been about family obligations, it had been about a grandmother being convinced to betray her biological granddaughter in favor of her adopted one, never knowing the person arguing for blood rights was herself adopted. Aria's phone buzzes with a text from Robert. Liora came home in pieces. She's locked herself in the bedroom and won't talk to the kids. They're scared and confused. Can we talk? The collateral damage spreads outward like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Emma and Michael, innocent children who had no part in their mother's crimes, now faced the psychological aftermath of their mother's complete identity crisis. Robert, caught between loyalty to his wife and the growing evidence of her wrongdoing, struggled to protect his children from chaos they couldn't understand. As evening settles over Millbrook, Aria sits in Eloise's favorite chair by the living room window, watching the harbor lights twinkle to life. The house feels different now. Not just legally hers, but genuinely hers, in a way she had never allowed herself to believe. She belongs here not through Eloise's charity, but through the oldest claim of all. She is home. But victory tastes more bitter than she had imagined. Somewhere across town, Liora is facing the complete destruction of her self-concept, forced to confront the reality that every cruel thing she had said about adopted children not being real family had been unknowingly directed at herself. The phone rings, jarring Aria from her thoughts. The caller ID shows a number she doesn't recognize, but when she answers, a woman's voice, nervous, hopeful, familiar in some genetic way, speaks words that will complicate everything even further. Is this Aria? Aria Holloway? This is Dorian Ravenscroft. I heard about the court proceedings, about the records being unsealed. I think it's time we met. Portland's waterfront gleams under Friday morning sunshine as Aria parks outside the small cafe Dorian suggested for their meeting. 3 days have passed since the phone call that shattered any remaining illusions about her origins. 3 days of sleepless nights spent staring at the mysterious photographs and wondering what her biological mother would be like after 28 years of silence. The Porthole Cafe sits on Commercial Street overlooking Casco Bay, its weathered shingles and lobster traps giving it the kind of authentic Maine charm that tourists pay premium prices to experience. Aria arrives 15 minutes early, needing time to prepare for a conversation that will fill in the final gaps of her fractured family history. Aria recognizes Dorian immediately, despite the decades that separate the young woman in the photographs from the composed figures sitting by the window. The same dark hair, now threaded with silver and pulled back in a practical ponytail. The same determined chin and intelligent eyes that Aria sees in her own reflection. But where the photographs showed youth and uncertainty, the woman who rises to greet her carries herself with the confident bearing of someone who has built a successful life from difficult circumstances. Aria. Dorian's voice carries warmth tempered by nervousness. You look exactly like your father did at your age. They embrace awkwardly, two strangers bound by genetics and separated by a lifetime of missed connections. Dorian smells like antiseptic and lavender, the scent of someone who works in healthcare but maintains feminine touches despite the practical demands of her profession. Thank you for calling, Aria says as they settle into chairs overlooking the harbor. I've had so many questions since finding those photographs. Dorian orders coffee with steady hands, but Aria notices the way she fidgets with her wedding ring, a simple gold band that speaks of a life built after the complicated past they're here to discuss. I heard about the court proceedings through mutual acquaintances. Small state, smaller communities. When the adoption records were unsealed, she pauses, gathering courage. I knew it was time to stop hiding from the choices I made 28 years ago. The story emerges slowly, like tide revealing treasures buried in sand. Dorian had been 21 when she met Cale Duskbane at a bar in Portland, a young nurse working double shifts to pay off student loans while he enjoyed his final leave before deployment overseas. He was troubled, Dorian explains, stirring cream into her coffee with absent precision. Haunted by things he'd seen in his first deployment, drinking too much, making choices that scared me even as I fell in love with him. When he shipped out, I thought that was the end of it, a beautiful, dangerous chapter that I'd close and move on from. But pregnancy had complicated the narrative. Dorian discovered she was carrying Cale's child 2 months after his death in a roadside bombing, alone and financially unstable, with no family support and no resources to raise a child. The military death benefits went to Eloise as next of kin, leaving Dorian with nothing but grief and impossible choices. I tried to make it work, she continues, her voice growing thick with decades of suppressed pain. I took extra shifts, moved into a studio apartment barely big enough for a crib. But I was drowning, Aria, working 16-hour days and still couldn't afford childcare, couldn't provide stability, couldn't give you what you needed. Aria listens without judgment, recognizing the impossible position of a young woman trying to navigate single motherhood without support or resources. The decision to contact Eloise hadn't been abandonment. It had been love translated into sacrifice. Your grandmother came to see you when you were 6 months old, Dorian says, pulling out a photograph Aria hasn't seen before, Eloise holding infant Aria, while Dorian watched from across a hospital room with an expression of devastating love. She took one look at you and said, she belongs with family. Not with her family, with family. Like it was already decided. The arrangement had been informal initially. Dorian would retain parental rights, but Eloise would provide primary care, giving Aria stability while allowing her birth mother to finish nursing school and establish herself professionally. But as months passed and Aria bonded more deeply with Eloise, the temporary solution became permanent heartbreak. She was happier with your grandmother, Dorian admits, her voice barely above a whisper. Thriving in ways I couldn't provide. When Eloise suggested legal guardianship to ensure your security and education, I knew it was right, even though it destroyed me. The secrecy had been Eloise's idea, protection from scandal in a small Maine community where unmarried mothers still face judgment, but also protection from the complexity that open adoption might create. Eloise had worried that maintaining contact would confuse Aria's sense of belonging, while Dorian had feared that staying involved would undermine the stability she'd sacrificed everything to provide. I moved to Boston for a few years. Couldn't bear living so close while watching you grow up from a distance. But I always kept track through mutual friends, through the newspaper when you graduated high school, when you became a social worker. I was so proud. So grateful that you'd chosen a profession helping children like yourself. Aria stares across the harbor, where fishing boats return with the day's catch, processing this alternate version of her origin story. Not abandoned by an uncaring birth mother, but released through devastating love by a woman who chose her daughter's well-being over her own desires. Why now? Aria asks. Why reach out after all these years? Dorian's expression rose fierce with maternal protectiveness that 2 decades couldn't diminish. Because I heard what that woman did to you, what Liora did to Eloise. Her voice hardens. I gave you up so you could have security and love with your real family. I won't stand by and watch someone steal that from you based on lies about blood and adoption. The irony strikes them both simultaneously. Dorian, the biological mother who gave up her parental rights, now defending her daughter against the woman who used biological superiority to justify theft, never knowing she herself was adopted. I don't expect anything from you, Dorian says quickly. I made my choice 28 years ago, and I've lived with the consequences. But I wanted you to know the truth about why I let you go. It wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I loved you too much to keep you. As afternoon shadows lengthen across the harbor, Aria finds herself looking at a woman whose sacrifice had made her entire life possible. The stability, the education, the loving home with Eloise, all of it built on one young mother's recognition that love sometimes means letting go. The question now isn't whether she can forgive the woman who gave her away. It's whether she can forgive herself for the anger she's carried toward a sacrifice she never understood. Sunday evening finds Aria standing on the front steps of the Victorian house she now legally owns, keys heavy in her palm as she prepares for the most difficult conversation of her life.
The contractor's equipment has been removed, the demolition postponed indefinitely pending the criminal investigation. The house waits in twilight silence, its windows reflecting the last golden rays of October sunshine like watchful eyes. Liora's Mercedes sits in the circular driveway, its silver paint dulled by 3 days of neglect. Through the kitchen window, Aria can see her sister sitting at grandmother's tables, surrounded by photo albums and documents, the detritus of a life spent believing she was something she never was. The front door opens at Aria's touch, unlocked in a gesture that feels like surrender. She finds Liora exactly where she expected, in Eloise's favorite chair by the living room window, wearing the same clothes she'd left Elias's office in 3 days ago. Her hair hangs limp around her face, and dark circles under her eyes suggest she slept as little as Aria has. "I knew you'd come," Liora says without looking up from the photograph in her hands. A picture of 3-year-old Liora being welcomed into the Ironwood family, gap-toothed smile radiating pure joy at finding a new home. Aria settles into the opposite chair, the same spot where she'd listened to countless bedtime stories, received comfort during teenage heartbreaks, shared dreams about her future in social work. The room feels heavy with the weight of decades of memories, now recontextualized by truth. "How long have you known?" Liora asks, finally meeting Aria's eyes. "About the adoption records, I mean. About who we really are." "I suspected something was wrong with grandmother's will from the beginning, but I only learned about our actual origins when the court unsealed the records." Aria's voice carries exhaustion that goes deeper than sleepless nights. "I'm guessing you had no idea?" Liora laughs, a sound devoid of humor. "None. I built my entire identity on being the biological granddaughter."
4 days to dismantle 28 years of belonging. The house welcomes her with its usual embrace of creaking floorboards and lavender-scented air. But everything feels tainted now by the knowledge that none of it truly belongs to her, never belonged to her according to the cruel mathematics of blood versus love. Aria drops her purse beside the antique hall table and stares up at the family portraits lining the staircase wall. 4 generations of Ironwoods gazing down with painted eyes that suddenly seem to judge rather than welcome. She begins in Eloise's bedroom, the most painful place, but also the most logical. If there are answers to be found, they'll be here, among her grandmother's most private possessions. The room still smells like Eloise's rosewater and the menthol cream she used for arthritis. Aria opens the mahogany wardrobe with reverent care, running her fingers over dresses that still hold the shape of the woman who wore them. Behind the winter coats, she discovers a leather document folder she's never seen before. Inside, medical records from Dr. Whitman's office dating back 6 months. Aria sinks onto the window seat, autumn light streaming across pages that paint a troubling picture of Eloise's final months. Increased anxiety, memory problems, notes about family stress, and patient reports feeling pressured about financial decisions. One entry from mid-July stops Aria cold. Patient exhibits signs of distress when discussing estate planning, reports granddaughter visiting frequently and talking about bloodlines and adoption. Biology, blood, the same words Liora used so casually in the lawyer's office, as if genetics were currency and love merely sentiment. Aria photographs the medical records with shaking hands, then turns to the wooden jewelry box on Eloise's vanity, one of the few things she's apparently entitled to inherit. But as she opens the familiar compartments, she discovers something unexpected, a small brass key hidden beneath the velvet lining. A key that fits the antique writing desk downstairs, the desks that had been mysteriously locked since the funeral. The desk reveals its secrets reluctantly. Hidden in the bottom drawer, Aria finds a manila envelope labeled Aria, personal, in Eloise's careful handwriting. Inside, photographs that don't match her understanding of family history. A picture of Eloise holding a baby. Clearly Aria based on the resemblance, but the woman beside them isn't anyone Aria recognizes. Young, beautiful, with Aria's dark hair and determined chin. There are letters too, written in a flowing script Aria doesn't recognize. "Dear Eloise, I hope you understand this is the hardest decision I've ever made, but Kale is gone, and I can't give her what she needs. You can. Please tell her someday that I loved her enough to let her go." The letter is signed D and dated 28 years ago. D, not a social worker or adoption agency coordinator, but someone who knew Eloise personally, someone who knew Kale. Aria's hands tremble as she studies the photographs again, noting details she'd missed. The intimate way the woman's hand rests on Eloise's shoulder, the comfortable familiarity in their shared smile. This wasn't a formal adoption. This was family. The sound of the front gate creaking interrupts her discovery. Through the window, she sees Mrs. Henley from next door approaching with a covered casserole dish, the kind that has sustained grieving families in small towns for generations. "Oh, sweetheart," Mrs. Henley says when Aria opens the door, her weathered face creased with genuine sympathy. "I brought you some of that tuna noodle casserole your grandmother always loved. Thought you might need some comfort food while you're sorting things out." They sit in the kitchen where Aria has eaten thousands of meals, where homework was completed and teenage heartbreaks were discussed over cups of cocoa. Mrs. Henley's presence is comforting, familiar, and before she knows it, Aria finds herself asking questions. "Mrs. Henley, do you remember much about when Liora and I first came to live with grandmother?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The older woman's expression shifts subtly. "Well, dear, you were..."
I convinced myself that love was less important than genetics, that Eloise choosing you over me was somehow unfair to her real family. She holds up the photograph with shaking hands. Look at this little girl. She's so happy to belong somewhere. And I destroyed that belonging with my own hands. The silence stretches between them, filled with the ghost of their grandmother's presence. Aria can almost hear Eloise's voice urging them to forgive each other, to remember that family is built through choice rather than circumstance. But some betrayals cut too deep for easy reconciliation. I met Dorian yesterday, my birth mother. Liora's composure cracks slightly. What was she like? Complicated. Strong. She gave me up because she loved me too much to keep me in an unstable situation. Aria studies her sister's face, searching for the woman she'd once trusted completely. She made an impossible sacrifice to ensure I had the security and love that Eloise could provide. The opposite of what you did. You manipulated love for personal gain. I know. The words emerge as barely a whisper. I know what I did was unforgivable. I convinced a vulnerable woman to doubt 28 years of love, to betray her own moral compass because I couldn't accept that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the most important person in her life. Liora sets down the photograph and turns to face Aria fully. Do you remember when we were 12 and 13, that summer we got caught stealing candy from Henderson's store? Grandmother made us work there all summer to pay it back. But more importantly, to understand the difference between taking what we wanted and earning what we deserved. Aria nods, remembering the long, hot days, stocking shelves and sweeping floors, learning lessons about integrity that had shaped her entire approach to social work. I never learned that lesson, Liora continues. I spent my whole life taking what I wanted. First, grandmother's attention through manipulation and competition, then Robert's love by being whoever I thought he wanted, then the inheritance by exploiting an old woman's confusion. I never learned to earn anything honestly. The admission hangs in the air between them. 31 years of dysfunctional patterns finally acknowledged. Aria sees clearly now how Liora's desperate need for belonging had twisted into something that destroyed the very connections she claimed to protect. Detective Russo says the district attorney will likely file elder abuse charges. The evidence is overwhelming. Financial exploitation, psychological manipulation, witness intimidation. You could go to prison. Liora nods with the resignation of someone who has already accepted the inevitable consequences. What about you? Will you push for the harshest sentence possible? I wouldn't blame you if you did. The question forces Aria to examine the complicated mixture of love, anger, and disappointment that defines her feelings toward the sister who raised her as much as Eloise had. The woman who had comforted her through nightmares, who had taught her to drive, who had celebrated her social work degree with genuine pride. That woman still exists beneath the manipulative stranger who had stolen her inheritance. I want justice for grandmother. She deserved to spend her final months in peace, surrounded by love instead of pressure and confusion. But I also want you to get help, Liora. Real help for whatever drove you to hurt the person who loved you most. Liora's eyes fill with tears that have been building for days. She did love me, didn't she? Despite everything? Despite the fact that I wasn't her biological granddaughter, she really did love me. She loved us both, completely, without reservation. Aria's voice softens with the memory of Eloise's unconditional devotion. The tragedy is that you were so afraid of losing that love that you destroyed it trying to possess it. The grandfather clock chimes 8 o'clock. Its familiar sound echoing through rooms that will soon be restored to their intended purpose, not as monuments to stolen inheritance, but as the family home they were always meant to be. Outside, Millbrook Harbor settles into evening quiet, fishing boats returning with the day's catch, the eternal rhythm of tides that will outlast all human complications. I'll cooperate with the investigation, Liora says finally. I'll plead guilty, accept whatever sentence they give me, and I'll sign over any claim to the inheritance immediately. It was never mine to begin with. As her sister gathers her things to leave, perhaps for the last time as a free woman, Aria realizes that some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive completely. But love can survive even the deepest wounds if both people choose healing over revenge. The question now isn't whether they can return to being the sisters they once were. It's whether they can build something new from the ruins of what they've lost.
Instead, Aria has restored it to its intended purpose, a family home where love matters more than genetics, where belonging is earned through choice rather than claimed through blood. The doorbell chimes at 9 o'clock sharp, its Westminster melody announcing the arrival of visitors Aria both expected and dreaded. Through the front window, she watches Liora emerge from a modest Honda Civic, her Mercedes repossessed months ago as part of the restitution agreement, followed by Robert and the children. Emma, now 7, carries a bouquet of daffodils picked from their apartment's small garden. 4-year-old Michael clutches a drawing he made at school, stick figures labeled Great-Grandma Eloise in Heaven. The criminal case had concluded 3 months ago with Liora's guilty plea to elder abuse charges. 2 years probation, community service, mandatory therapy, and complete restitution of the stolen inheritance. A sentence that acknowledged both the severity of her crimes and the complex family dynamics that had created them. Detective Russo had praised Aria's recommendation for treatment over pure punishment, recognizing that healing required more than legal consequences. "Good morning," Liora says as Aria opens the door, her voice carrying the careful politeness of someone still learning to navigate their redefined relationship. She's lost weight during the legal proceedings, her once perfect appearance replaced by the practical simplicity of someone whose priorities have undergone fundamental revision. "Morning," Aria replies, stepping aside to let them enter. The children rush past their mother with the resilience that allows young minds to adapt to complicated situations adults struggle to comprehend. Emma heads straight for the piano bench where she and Eloise used to practice scales, while Michael examines the toy box that has waited patiently for small hands to rediscover its treasures. Robert offers Aria a hesitant smile, his expression conveying gratitude mixed with ongoing concern for his family's stability. "Thank you for this," he says quietly, "for letting us be part of today." The decision to include Liora in the memorial service hadn't been easy. Months of family therapy, both individual and joint sessions, had slowly untangled the complex web of love, resentment, and shared trauma that had defined their relationship. Dr. Sarah Martinez, their counselor, had emphasized that healing required acknowledging both the depth of betrayal and the reality of lifelong connection. "Children," Aria calls, "would you like to help me set up grandmother's memorial garden?" They spend the morning planting the rose bushes Aria special ordered, the same varieties Eloise had tended for decades before arthritis made gardening impossible. Emma proves surprisingly adept with the small trowel, while Michael's enthusiasm exceeds his coordination in ways that would have delighted his great-grandmother. Liora works silently beside them, her movements tentative, as if she's unsure of her right to participate in honoring the woman she'd betrayed. But when Emma asks why great-grandma Eloise isn't here to see the new flowers, Liora finds words that surprise them all with their honesty. "Because sometimes people make mistakes that hurt the people they love most," she says, kneeling to meet her daughter's eyes. Great-grandma Eloise died feeling sad and confused because Mommy made some very bad choices. But I hope, she would be happy to see us here together, trying to fix what got broken. The afternoon brings other visitors, neighbors who remember Eloise's kindness, former students from the library reading programs, Dr. Whitman carrying a covered dish and memories that span decades. They gather in the restored living room, sharing stories that paint a picture of a woman whose love transcended the complications that followed her death. "She used to say that family wasn't about the blood in your veins, but about the people who showed up when life got difficult," Mrs. Henley recalls. As evening approaches and the visitors depart, Aria finds herself alone with Liora in the kitchen, where they'd shared thousands of meals, homework sessions, and late-night conversations. The dishwasher hums with familiar efficiency, restoring order after the day's remembrance. "I've been accepted into the nursing program at Southern Maine Community College. Part-time so I can still manage probation and therapy requirements, but it's something. Honest, something that might help people instead of hurting them." Aria nods, recognizing the significance of Liora choosing a helping profession, perhaps the first decision her sister has made based on service rather than self-interest. Grandmother would approve. She always believed people could change if they were willing to do the work. "Are we doing the work?" Liora asks, the question carrying 20 years of sisterhood and 6 months of cautious rebuilding. Are we going to be okay? Aria considers the question as she watches harbor lights twinkle to life across Millbrook's darkening coastline. The relationship they're building bears little resemblance to the easy intimacy they'd once shared. It's more careful now, more conscious, built on acknowledged truth rather than comfortable assumptions. We're different than we were. Maybe that's not entirely bad. The sisters we were before were built on secrets and lies, even if we didn't know it. These sisters, the ones choosing to show up despite everything, might actually be stronger. Outside, the spring tide rises towards its monthly peak, carrying away the debris of winter storms and depositing gifts from distant shores. In the Victorian house that has sheltered 4 generations of chosen family, 2 sisters who learned the difference between blood and belonging continue the patient work of healing, not because genetics demand it, but because love, when freely given, proves stronger than the lies that tried to destroy it. The grandfather clock chimes 10 o'clock, marking another day in the slow process of rebuilding trust. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, continued therapy sessions, the ongoing work of learning to be family by choice rather than assumption. But tonight, in the house that was always meant to be home,
Forgiveness begins its quiet work of making broken things whole again.